Let me say greetings and good evening to all of you, and we appreciate you giving us the opportunity to come before you again. As you know, we are anxiously trying to push low-income housing and make low-income housing a great part of our community and keep it a great part of our community. Ed is our consultant that's going to be making a presentation of what we'd like to do. We're looking at this time and doing a reconstruction of the state sites, which is 131 units. Our aim and our goal is to increase density as well as keep and maintain low-income housing at the same time. And we want to make this preliminary presentation of what our dream is and look at what we're looking to do going forward. One of the reasons we want to come before you at this time is because there are some opportunities and options that might be available now that might fade away if we wait too long. So we want to try to get this started. Also, we want to, after the presentation, if you have any questions, you can ask those questions. If you have some suggestions of what you feel as the town board to give to us as we formulate this dream, we do welcome those ideas, because we want to work together to do what's best for the entire town, especially the part of town called Fairview, where the 131 units are. Ed is our consultant, and he'll make a presentation. You know Mr. Abraham, our counsel, John Savage, and we have Mr. Campbell, Mr. Robertson, and Sweetheart. that is accompanying us, but we call it Sweetheart. But if you have anything that that the questions are later, if you have any suggestions while we're in the planning stages, we want to include the town board early enough wherein we can be on the same page as we move along. Garrett has been a great part of this early stage of planning and gave us some suggestions that we have taken in consideration. And Garrett has already looked at the presentation, and he might be able to answer some of the technical questions that might come up. So with that, we'll turn it over to Ed. You ready? Tick. Oh,
sorry, everyone.
I got to talk some more.
The presentation, I know you emailed me something fairly recently. Do you want me to go upstairs and share screen, or is it a different presentation?
No, it's the same.
It is the same? Okay,
That would be fast.
That'll be faster.
I'll go do that.
Thank you,
And
Darren.
you just direct me what page you want to be on.
Sure. Pow.
There you go.
Garrett?
Garrett?
Seems okay?
Yeah, it ran at the very end.
Okay.
Well, now it's installing. So it gathered.
No.
Now it's installing.
It's going pretty fast now.
Well, I'll see what's happening.
No worries.
We're talking about increasing the number of affordable housing from 131, what are you basically looking at?
Well, at the end of the presentation, I think we're looking at about was 190,
Close to 200,
close to 200.
That's fantastic.
close to 200. To what the chairperson was adding, I would just want to give an update on the Greenberg.
I'm sorry,
Heights.
I'm sorry. Can you guys introduce yourselves? Because I know you started talking.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I know your family, but we just want to make sure everyone knows who's watching, who's who, please.
Raju Abraham, Executive Director, Greenberg Housing Authority. I want to add to what the chairperson was mentioning about the redevelopment process. Thank you, Mr. Fine, about the good words you had for Manhattan Avenue. We are almost there. I would say 99%. We're just waiting for Carnet to supply us with power and the Department of Health to sign off on the permits for the sewer. Once those things are through, hopefully we are hoping that by November at least we should be able to bring back our seniors there. On the Greenberg scattered sites, I'm very happy to say that construction is substantially complete. We have almost 83 families who came back to the units there. 3 more families, 82 have come back. 3 more families are going to be, signing their lease. And other than for playgrounds and landscaping, all the sites are done. So I want to say thank you for the support from the town
That's great.
on these 2 projects. Like the bishop, like the chairperson was mentioning. the
Garrett's got
states-
it up.
There it
I'm
is.
sorry.
Okay.
I just had to, I
And
apologize.
and to go along with that, the 80, there was 85 scattered site units, and 82 of those are filled, and we got applications that we're processing
That's
for the
great.
other 3 units. Also, before we get into the presentation, I think it'd be good information. We did acquire a grant for the state site for free Wi-Fi, and that is almost 100% installed and good, right on time for school. And-
That's a broadband?
That's
Yes,
excellent.
broadband.
That's great.
That's great.
And we'll be get in touch with you to come and look at a presentation of how that works. That's going to help us with communicating with the families, getting information directed to the families without walking the properties and all those kind of things. So it's going to be a very unique piece of work. This is the first type of broadband in the county. I think it's about the first in the state and close to first in the country. So we are setting the pace for technology and doing that. So I think you'd be really happy to
And
see that. in
the
operation.
Housing Authority still has very high ratings, the independent ratings that you've had in the past?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Great.
we're still a high performer, housing authority.
Bishop, is the connectivity in terms of the infrastructure sufficient? Have they been working, now that you've got the connectivity for free, but nonetheless, are people accessing it, and is it stable, and,
Yeah, the consultant assured us that there's enough bandwidth to accommodate the number of people that will be using.
more than the bandwidth, just the transmission type in terms of how it's powered, whether it's copper cable or
Oh,
whether
no, no.
it's
There's, basically,
fiber.
we have a center that the signal comes into, and everything else is done wireless. It's a wireless unit,
very
so
good.
there'll be
Okay.
less interference with that.
Could you, when you're going through your presentation, I had mentioned this with the senior housing, is that in the 70s or so, there was a movement towards scattered site housing, which seemed to be a success. When you redid scattered site housing, you refurbished them, but you didn't try to increase the numbers spread out. It seems like we're doing the opposite now. When we did the senior housing, I questioned, we're putting more low-income housing in one particular area, but you made a good point. It's for seniors, and it's right next to the community center. You can't get a better place for seniors. But now it seems like you also want to significantly increase the number of low-income housing in a particular area of the town. Why is that, as opposed to the concept that we had in the 70s?
Oh, don't we need more housing? There's-
Paul, well, I'm asking them.
Okay.
Well, we considered that, and we've even looked at other parcels of land that we might be able to develop, and that it's tough to find land to develop any kind of affordable or low-income housing. And so we went back to the concept of increasing density because of the great need. For instance, the senior complex, when we opened the waiting list for that, application process for that, for 70 units, we got over 300 applications, like within so many hours. It's a great need for housing, even in this area. And we do understand that Fairview carries a lot of the low-income housing. But I think the need and the upgrade that's needed, because the infrastructure at the state site where the 131 units is so dilapidated until it's getting almost, it's not cost effective to try to restore the underground services and the infrastructure, it's just too bad. When we try to patch one place, it puts pressure on another spot, it breaks. And so if we're going to do construction, we want to like to take the opportunity to increase density, because we have probably, probably 600 people on the waiting list now.
Right now, on our public housing waiting list, we have 157, to be
157.
precise. And actually, when we opened up the Greenberg Heights waiting list, which closes on October 26th, we have more than 350 applications. So that is on the Heights alone for family size. And as the chair mentioned, for the 70 one-bedroom units, we had more than 400 applications.
Right,
So
I'm
there
not
is a-
arguing the need. What I'm stating is, why do they all have to be in one area of the town? It's a further impact on the Fairview Fire Department, because there's going to be very little taxes paid on these, just like on the other sites, and they're all in the Fairview Fire Department, for just as one example. Whereas in the past, the sites were spread out, made it more neighborly throughout the unincorporated area. But now the recent trend is cluster in one area. And then after they're built, the board is going to hear, why are you putting all the low income in one area? I'm asking in advance as to what is the logic of the Greenberg Housing Authority for not, when you were refurbishing the other buildings in other areas, to make increases there and take people off the waiting list and put them in those other sites, as opposed to clustering them in one area. I appreciate the logic as to what goes behind that.
So isn't it the case that the sites we're here to discuss today are the original sites that were built to the Greenberg Housing Authority?
About 60 years ago.
So the infrastructure for those sites is considerably older than the infrastructure for the scattered sites that have recently been renovated? Is that the
I
case?
think, yeah,
They have been, we had done some, I would say, Band-Aid renovations in the early 2008 or 2000, yeah.
To the sites you're talking about renovating tonight, right? So, but the answer to my question is, or I'll ask my question again. The infrastructure, the sites we're here to talk about today is considerably older than that of the scattered sites that were recently renovated, right?
Yes.
So what we're talking about doing today is basically a complete tear down and rebuild rather than a refurbishment, correct?
Correct.
And so the thought process behind increasing the density here is, since you have to tear it all down and rebuild it, why not increase the density versus the scatter sites where you were just doing a facelift? Is that correct?
Correct.
Does that address your question?
That's a
No.
very good
No?
answer.
Well, not really.
So we have the
but
scatter
yes,
sites
no.
were built in the early 70s, correct?
Yes.
They're about 50-something years old.
yeah, 50 something, yeah.
What is their useful life? Most buildings don't have a useful life much more than that.
Correct.
So getting to the counselor's point, if you're putting major renovations into buildings that are more than 50 years old, how old is the original building? When were they built?
50s.
I think they're close to 60 years old. I have to check
All
that,
right,
but
so
they're
it's-
considerably older than the.
So it's 53 versus 60. I still am questioning why not expand those at the same time, because basically you're buying yourself another 10 or 15 years?
No, well, you have to understand, Mr. Sheehan, that in the renovation of the scattered sites, we did in the interior, from the hookup to the town throughout the property, we did install new infrastructure, because that infrastructure was bad also. I remember at North Washington, we had to put a temporary power line down because the electric grid was so bad underground. We had to put a temporary power line in and rebuild that electric underground line. But we did put in new sewer lines, new water lines in the interior of all those buildings. And so that infrastructure is new. We, on the renovation of those properties, we tore those down all the way to the studs. Some of the studs had to be replaced, but the studs was the only thing left. Everything else in the building is new. The studs and the foundation were the only things that was not majorly disturbed. And the site on Old Tarrytown Road, we had to go back and do some of the had to reconstruct some of the foundation because of some deterioration. And those things you was not able to see until you got into the construction process. But I think your question is why not do all the infrastructure there versus what we're trying to do at the
With
state.
potential expansion
Yeah.
or new sites, or instead of clustering. It's just a completely different philosophy, it seems, than the scattered sites philosophy in the 70s.
And, well, one of the things that the scattered sites, the property, the parcel of property is much smaller than the state site, and it would be more difficult, I think, to look at expanding unless we went up 4 or 5 stories. And I don't think the town is amenable to taller structures. And even with the state site, we will be looking at, to expand the property, to expand the density, we'll be asking for a code change, what's the? A zoning change, yeah, like we did at Manhattan Avenue, to accommodate more density. So weighing apples against apples, it just looked more feasible to do it from what in our preliminary study, it looked more feasible to do it at the state site than we did at the
And
scattered
basically, we know, just from reading the paper and hearing the governor, there is a severe housing shortage, affordable housing shortage in Westchester County and the entire state. You know, the New York Times did a cover story on the lack of affordable housing across the country. So I think it's very commendable that the Housing Authority is actually looking to increase the density, provide more residents who need affordable housing with quality, new, affordable housing. You know, I think this is something that is desperately needed. You know, when I look at, you know, what you've done with the Manhattan Avenue complex, we're upgrading people's quality of life, and the land, you know, it's large enough to accommodate 200 units. So I am like extremely enthusiastic. You know, if it was 250 units, I'd be enthusiastic also, even more enthusiastic, because we definitely, you know, we could talk all we want about the need for affordable housing, but, you know, here we have an opportunity to actually get something done. If we start figuring out reasons why we're not going to let them do it, we're never going to make a dent in terms of addressing the affordable housing crisis. Now, that doesn't mean we can't look for other opportunities around the town. But, you know, I spoke to you, the bishop, and Raju about this site, you know, a couple years ago. So, you know, I'm like, I think what you're doing is extremely, you know, extremely commendable.
And I agree that we shouldn't be forestalling that, but I don't think anyone was suggesting that. I don't think the councilman was suggesting that we don't do that, but also that we think out of the box going forward, you know, maybe adaptive reuse of some commercial properties.
Expand
But-
the areas, and expand the areas
and
of where
expand
we
the area,
have
yeah.
low-income housing, and what, instead of clustering, and that was the word that Councilman Sheehan mentioned, the word clustering, we're having low-income housing in one area,
I think they got
and
it.
not,
Yeah,
okay.
we have.
I just
we
want to
are-
make sure, because I didn't.
I
we
understand.
Oh, okay,
understand
okay.
that, and
I think the
it's not-
supervisor got it too.
It's
just-
not,
Oh, okay.
and it's not our intent to oversaturate the Fairview area with
Right, 'cause it's
low-income housing. We want to take
concern.
advantage of an opportunity here that might not be there if we continue to wait too long.
And we're also looking at
But
accessory
if you have-
development.
If you have suggestions, that's why in my opening statement, if you have some suggestions of how we can expand in other areas, because let's be frank, we have run into great resistance in other areas trying to put affordable housing. It's not an easy thing to do in certain areas of our town. And so when we did the scattered sites, we considered that because some areas is just resistant to low-income housing or affordable housing, irregardless to how it looks or how it builds up the community or And Paul said it makes, it builds up the living for the residents. But it also, what we're doing also builds up the profile of the town. I mean, if you look at Manhattan Avenue, it don't look like affordable housing. It looks like something that we should be getting $4,000 a month for rent for. But we had
And-
this opportunity, and I think we just want to take advantage of it.
And to clarify, affordable housing in Westchester is not inexpensive, even if you're going to 40 or 60%
Absolutely.
area median income. So,
And that's why we focus on low income.
Yeah.
We want to maintain low income housing because there is the greater need. And so we want to make sure
yeah,
that
and that's where we need subsidies. Yeah.
and from the housing authority perspective, that's what we want to maintain.
But, you know, a couple months ago, Hugh Schwartz and Walter Simon and Johan Sachs met with the town board, and they talked about the accessory development units. So this is really part of a larger package that will create affordable housing opportunities. So this by itself, you know, won't solve the affordable housing, but it will contribute to making a dent. If we do the accessory development units, that's something that's.
Accessory dwelling.
Dwelling units,
Dwelling,
dwelling
yeah,
units.
I'm sorry. That is spread out all over the town, and, you know, that also creates affordable housing opportunities. So if we could get that
It's not
legislation.
quite the same in terms of conflating
And
it,
it's-
but
No,
it
but
certainly
it's
will
moving.
address, I'm not
Yeah.
contradicting you per se, it's just clarifying for people listening
Yeah.
what ADUs can provide, some small adjunct housing to existing homeowners for maybe additional income, and it does provide additional residence, but there are limitations on
Okay.
the size of those. But I would like to hear your presentation and then be able to ask questions.
And before
We're still on the first slide.
Yeah, let me say this before Ed starts. And it is our plan for the Housing Authority to expand its footprint and build on other properties if the opportunity. With the experience that we're getting and with the rating that we have with that experience, we'll have a great opportunity to do that moving forward. But because some of the things that we incurred with Manhattan Avenue, we didn't have to incur with the scattered sites because of the experience of going through the process. And so the more experience we have, we may not have to have so many consultants. We can be our own developer, and that way we can do more with the funding that we get for
But there's
affordable.
also a concern too that the subsidies that we put, there's also a concern too that the subsidies that we put in place, there's a hardship or becomes a hardship on the taxpayers in the area.
We
So that's
understand
why the question keeps coming up, and you and I've had this conversation before, that, you know, it's great that we are expanding, and I want to expand because we definitely need the housing opportunity, but I do get concerned about what the hardship it puts on our taxpayers. So I just, you know.
And the service providers, it puts a greater, you know,
Yeah.
like the fire department, police department, it puts, we understand that.
So,
All right,
shall we begin?
Garrett, you can reshare again.
Yeah, hi, my name is Ed Vogel, principal at Warshauer, Maluzzi Warshauer Architects. As it was mentioned earlier, we've been consulting with the Greenberg Housing Authority on what the potential is for their state site. And I'm glad Garrett is in the hot seat. And so what we, you can look at the screens around the room. Our first slide is just to help locate and orient you to where the project site is. You can see in here 287 is being a major, right? The site is where the hand is. It's marked in a yellow highlighter. 287 is to the south of us. You can see this from this Google aerial, how the neighborhoods have evolved and developed. The yellow indicates areas of affordable housing. The red areas are market rate multifamily, and then the green are some green park spaces. So we are bound to the south with 287. We're bound from Old Tarrytown Road to the north, and then to the west, we have Maple Avenue and the neighborhood there. And we have access from Maple, Beach, and Oak Streets. And then to our east, there is a watercourse and a stream that runs through that wooded area on the Google image. So seeing the neighborhoods here, our next slide is the zoning map. And the zoning map is as it is today. Highlighted in yellow is the project site, and we're in the M14 zone. So you can see that we have an urban redevelopment area, we have an office business area, we have another multifamily M10 in the area, and then there's also R5 single family, which is immediately to our west, but that's with limited multifamily involved. And then on the other side of 287, there's another R5 zone, which is limited to family. So those are more or less the neighborhoods in and around the project site. At the corner, there's also an R7.5. If we move to the next slide, we're going to show you here what the existing site looks like. So the site here, as we mentioned, it's now rotated, so north is to the right, and you can see written there is Old Tarrytown Road. To the south is 287. You can start to see the highway, and there is a sound barrier. To the west is the neighborhood with access from Oak, Beach, and Maple Avenue, and then to the east is that watercourse brook that resides in the wooded area, draining the areas to the north, and it takes it underneath 287 and then continues on its way. There are 131 units here presently, and as I mentioned, it's the M14 zone. Some of the things that we looked at in here is connectivity to the neighborhood. We looked at gaining site access to the neighborhood. We're also looking at the watercourse and its buffer with the embankment, and then we have some zoning setbacks. What we'd like to do is address some of the, those are the site influences that we have. In the design, the vision for the housing authority for the site is to, and if we go to the next slide, you can see how we've taken that existing network of roads. So the first one is vehicular circulation. And vehicular circulation makes the site more accessible, it's more defensible, it's easier for emergency services to come in and around the area. Increased parking. Parking in the original site is about 3/4 of a space per unit. Here we're 1.25 spaces per unit, so overall it's an improvement for the entire site. We also want to increase density, so our dwelling typology needed to change. It changed from being garden apartment styles to here being an apartment building style with being elevated and interior corridors. We've maintained the streetscape along Old Tarrytown Road, which is actually a very beautiful part of Old Tarrytown Road, is a streetscape with the sidewalk removed off of the road and the larger shading trees that are there. We've provided open space in between the buildings for both active and passive recreation. We've also provided a community space, which they have today, that's also tucked into what we're considering Building 5, administrative offices, maintenance. So that's the vision that they've had and how we've come up with a solution. To get the added density, there would be a zone change, right, from the M14 to the M22. M22 affords us a higher density, and with the bonus, it would end up being roughly 190 units, and that's what this is contemplating here.
190 as opposed to what is existent now?
131.
Right, okay.
Right. The other mission that we have in this is if we go to the last slide,
Can we
is-
stick to this a second? Can I ask questions, or do you want to
Do you
make
want
your
me to just
presentation?
finish? Yeah, just
Okay.
one more point, and then we can scroll
Great.
back, I'm sure.
Thank you.
So, in here, one of the other missions that we have is to, no resident is going to be displaced from the project. So that creates a phasing
Right.
proposal here. And the way it's, you can see the gray buildings are the existing ones, and then the tan buildings become the new buildings. And it would then be phased in a manner that maintains the heating plant in the center. So this is a bit about the infrastructure. The infrastructure here is completely different than the scattered sites. So here, there's a central plant that will distribute not only heat, and hot water and cold water, but there's also electric. So all of that comes out of the central building, which is annotated right now, and the hand is over it. And it does 2 loops through the site. So as we started to phase the project, the idea here is that phase 1 would be all the way over to the left of the sheet, building number 1 as we've just identified it. And this building would have enough units to house the first 2 buildings plus 2 more. So our temporary relocation just becomes those first 2 buildings that are overlapping there. Once that building is up, which is proposed to be 4 stories, we can then just have one move for the residents through the remainder of the site. So the project would be phased over multiple years. As one building comes online, you move people in, the next building's then vacant, you can take that down and bring up the next building. So that, I just wanted to make a point, because that comes into play with some of the requests, not only with the M22 zone.
Right. They did something like that in White Plains, right?
Yes, they're still ongoing,
Yeah.
correct.
So I have a few questions. Number one, you're showing a great deal more of concrete, which, you build the parking lot and then you've got more flooding and you've got the brook right there. So I'm assuming you're factoring in drainage and so forth, but I'd
We
like
are.
to have assurances that that's the case.
Yes, that will be, we'll flush out all that engineering as we move forward.
Right.
We are still under the total site impervious that the M22 zone would permit for the site as we see it.
I'd love to have some redundancy there, though. Okay. Does the eligibility change, the parameters for eligibility change, or is it the same? Would it remain the same?
At this time, we're trying to maintain it as low-income time, or low-income housing, so that the eligibility will probably remain the same unless we see a way to do mixed income. But we're not at that point at this particular time. We're looking to maintain low-income housing.
Because that's what a lot of affordable housing now is doing, mixing
Yes.
40, 60, 80% in. So how about the height? As you said, you have to go for new zoning, so I'm not familiar with what we have in place, so forgive me in terms of height, how much higher you'll be going, and if at all, and will you be applying for variances in zone, in
Yeah,
height
so with the
zoning?
M22 zone, there are a few pieces that we need to discuss and work through. Height is one of them. To make our phasing concept work, we looked at building number 1 as 4 stories. Buildings 2, 3, and 4, as we work our way northerly across the property, would be 3. So zoning allows 3. And with a height of 38 feet, which we'd be meeting. Building number 5, which also fronts along Old Tarrytown Road, that would become a 2-story building. So we're being cognizant with the neighborhood being 2 and 3 stories for the majority, and then the 4-story building would be closer toward 287.
How many,
No, wait, I've been waiting patiently. Because I just asked Francis if I could go, so. Go ahead,
I-
finish your statement, yep. Mhm.
So that would be the height sequence as we see it. Building number 2, just to clear,
Presentation.
as you can see there on the annotation, there would be a partial basement, but the basement is not for units. It would be for support services for the complex, maintenance and some storage.
So you may have answered my question. So currently, the makeup of the apartments is a duplex, correct? Upstairs, downstairs? I think it was
Currently, they're multi-level.
The
correct.
multi-levels?
Yes.
Okay, so is that going to be the same for the ones that you're expanding as you go up
No,
high? Or
no,
is that
no.
going to be?
This
Okay.
would be an elevated
That's what I
building
wanted to
with
understand.
one
Huh?
story, one level
That's okay.
units, right, so.
I think to answer, more clearly answer your question, even for those that are listening. In some of the apartments now, you have multi-floors in the same apartment. What we're looking at now is once you're in that apartment, it's all on one level and with the raised building.
The question I had was the Old Tarrytown Road apartments, the one that, Sam Bolkins, built. Those are pretty high, the elevation is higher than, this, complex. I'm wondering how many stories, those buildings are. I think
Well,
because I think that this is going to still be lower
yes,
from.
I think, if my mind serves me correctly, Mr. Finer, with Manhattan Avenue, I think the permitted like 3.5 stories. And what we're asking in this is for 3 stories for 3 buildings, for 4 stories in 1 building to help us with the limited moving, and so we don't have to move so many people out.
You won't be moving
And
people out.
then
you'll just-
one building number 5 is a 2-story building. So we're trying to balance it out wherein it's some equity in
But
the,
I'm thinking, I was basically saying the Old Tarrytown Road, apartments, the height, the elevation is still higher.
3 stories
than-
on those apartments across the street
So
to
it's
the
basically
north of Old
consistent,
Tarrytown
it's
Road.
pretty consistent with the quality of the neighborhood.
Yeah, just one of the units would have 4 stories.
Right.
space.
One of the buildings.
One of the
one building,
buildings.
yes.
What
Yeah,
would be
that's-
helpful is if we had the elevation of each of these roofs compared to surrounding buildings, not so much
Yeah,
maybe
we can do that, yeah.
Sam's property, maybe include that, but what are the surrounding, when you say you built in
Francis.
open, when you say you built in open space between the buildings, they're parking lots, right? We don't really count, right?
No, if you
the
take a
yellow.
look at the site, we have focused on some rear yards for all of them. And we actually have some frontage, for example, at building number 3 as well. And we've left the open space fronting Maple and Old Tarrytown Road. So
I'm sorry,
The
you
active
said between the
recreation.
buildings, you had provided for open space.
Right.
The brown is the buildings.
correct.
What's this between the buildings?
Well, we do have parking
That's what I mean, so-
between, but we have provided open space.
And where is that?
All the green that you see, the light green and some of the dark green.
But not between the buildings.
So the
Technically-
parking lot separates the buildings?
So they're fingers. So if you look at the logic of the neighborhood,
Right.
from Oak Street to Beach and to Maple, there are extensions coming into the site, right? That makes a very logical entry into the area. Tree lined in the parking area. We are
Helps water.
addressing some of those items. So you're arriving.
Right. When you said we're permitted to have, that's assuming you get the code change, correct?
This is, the start of this
Right.
is the zoning change
Right.
to the M22.
Right. So when you were saying before, we can have 3 stories, we need a variance for 4, that's even if you get the code change.
The zoning change, yeah. yeah.
Because right now, you wouldn't be able to do this at all.
Right.
4 stories, no. No. The difference between the M14 and the M22, just as a base to it, height is basically the same, setbacks are basically the same. It becomes a density question.
Right.
Right.
I'm sorry, Francis, were you done?
Well, because of getting to Councilwoman Hendrick's statement before, flooding is always a concern. And generally, these things are built to 25-year storms because that's what was done historically. But frankly, that just doesn't work anymore. What are you factoring in? And the developer will come, the contractor will come, they'll build, they'll go, and then the first flood comes and our phones ring. Who are you hiring somebody who is going to give us some confidence that they will not get flooded? Are you building it so that there'll be high enough foundations and so forth, so this will not flood?
Yeah, we haven't, right, at this point, we haven't engineered anything yet. But we can certainly engineer to the 25, to the 50, even greater.
Yeah, great.
So, and we hear that, right?
Yeah, we hear that.
And so there is infiltrators, right? So we collect the water and then it gets slowed down and then I'm sure you've all, through the planning process, site plan approval, that will all be flushed out.
Right.
Right? So criteria through that process will be established.
Sure, and to that point also, a suggestion is taking utilities and not having them in the basement or even raising the utilities so that they're not impacted by flooding,
I'm just,
if there is flooding. And in addition, I just have a quick question, I'm sorry, Supervisor. Are they elevator buildings? Are you planning on elevator buildings?
Yes, they're elevated. So, yeah, what you touched on before was resiliency. That's another term that's been surfacing. So in resiliency, we are planning for disasters. It could be water, flooding. It could be electrical power. It could be heat.
Right.
It could be cooling. There are multiple levels of resiliency to be contemplated.
Well,
and that's certainly in our thinking.
Right, and to that point, whether it's on the buildings themselves, having solar panels or solar panels in the parking, having green roofs perhaps to help ameliorate any flooding, collecting water. So, yeah, I would hope that you'd implement that in any new.
We've so to speak, kicked that can down the street, and we do look at all those possibilities. And that's why we wanted to make sure today that this is just a concept of the layout, and all of the engineering
Understood.
and all that has not been done yet. Like we did at Manhattan Avenue, we knew that Manhattan Avenue was a flood zone. So we raised the property about 7 feet, and we put in storm resistors that where water can be retained and then pumped out at a later time. So looking at the area of the state site, we'd be looking at all of those things as part of the engineering process. And what we want to do is make this a longer, we want to build buildings that have a longer than 50-year lifespan, if possible. And part of that is the type of infrastructure and the type of services that you include in it. We learned our lesson with Manhattan Avenue. What I'm trying to think of it, excuse me, Beekman Court. Yes, we learned our lesson with Beekman Court, putting utilities in the basement. We had to pull those out and put them on top level. That so we are very
Well, it's just for us to
I just
know.
have one follow-up question in terms of the flooding. One of the things, I'd like to, work with the Housing Authority on this if you want, is, the governor, as you know, has been pushing for affordable housing and the state funding for flood remediation. And I sort of feel that if we reach out to the governor's office and our state lawmakers, Senator Cousins, Assemblywoman Shimsky, say, you know what, we're really excited about this. We're going to be increasing the number of units from 131 to almost 200 units. We need state funding so we could address flooding for the entire area. This may be really a great opportunity to get additional infrastructure, funding that could help alleviate flooding throughout the area. So, I'm like so excited about this that I don't think I'll be able to fall asleep tonight. I think this is because I think this is really, incredible. I was thinking before, the Housing Authority has gotten a lot of criticism over the years, from people. But, this is something, this is action. This is getting results for people. We could talk all we want about affordable housing and the need, and you're actually doing something. So, I'd like to, work very closely with you so this could happen as soon as possible. And, I'll try getting as much state and federal funding as possible so this dream could, really happen quickly. And when you have the ribbon cutting for the Manhattan Avenue project, and maybe we have state and federal lawmakers there, we should really be pushing to see if we could get, the flood grants as well.
To build on what the supervisor said, just in, looking for funding for affordable housing is one avenue of getting monies, but there's also all the federal infrastructure money that is available, and making sure to mine that field, as well as the Environmental Bond Act, the over $4 billion grant that we all voted for. So grants that we all voted for.
We're keenly aware of all those, and that's why we wanted to come to you early in the
Right.
process to get more of just say a partnership with the town and housing authority to make this happen for the people, because we know that we will need your support going forward with this, especially with the federal funding, state funding that might be available. If we work together, in our past, we know that if we work together, the plausibility of that happening is much greater than if we are not working
Right.
together on it.
And one other funding source, which you may or may not be aware of, is county funding, because they have a tranche of money for infrastructure for affordable housing. And there are a couple of sources, but you can call, Garrett is well aware and connected on that in terms of calling the planning department and getting specifics on that when you're ready.
Who owns the, I'm sorry.
Gentlemen and lady, I cannot tell you, because I have not kept running records of the number of people who call the clerk's office inquiring about affordable and low-income housing. So what you are doing is it's exemplary, because it needs to be done, and no one else has stepped forward to address this need in the manner in which you have, and in the manner in which you are doing right now. I cannot tell you the number of people who call the clerk's office inquiring about affordable and low-income housing. It's many.
Who owns the, whoever came up with this name is not very imaginative, Watercourse Brook?
That was me who came up with it. And I have to tell you that I tried to research what it's called. And even through the floodplain maps that are available, that's what they call it.
Okay.
So I wish there was a
But
better
who owns
name.
it? Who owns it?
The town.
I don't know who owns
Okay, so now it makes flooding even more of an issue, right? Because if it floods, it's the town's problem. The town has to widen it, the town has to dredge it, the town has to, all of this has to be taken into consideration. So we own that property that looks like a lot of trees, right? So that has to be taken into consideration as well, so that this does not become basically, an albatross on the town. You have your nice pretty buildings, they might be up high enough, but now we have to deal with Watercourse Brook.
And it looks like
It may actually stick,
Yeah,
You never know.
it looks like Watercourse Brook, or WB. And in some sort of retention pond
Well,
area, or
it's actually
could be?
flowing from the north to the south. So
Okay.
it's flowing from the right side of the sheet to the south side of the sheet.
Okay.
And it's collecting the water from across Old Tarrytown Road up, and its elevation starts to rise. And then it crosses under 287 and then travels westerly of all places,
Thank you, Karen.
and then loops back. It ends up at the Bronx River Park.
Oh, I see where you just have
But
the
we have to
cutoff
have an
line.
attitude, we're going to make this happen, because I sort of feel that when you're talking about flooding, we know we have to address the flooding. And the thing is, we know the state wants us to address the flooding, and the state has funds for it, the federal government has funds for it. So the thing is, I believe that if the town board speaks out and says, this is really an important project, this is a really good initiative, and we lobby our state and federal representatives, we will be able to get the funding that we need to address major storms. We probably will be able to improve drainage and flooding for the immediate area, because we're doing something that they want to see happen, and now we could help improve flooding for the whole, that whole Warren Avenue, and, they've had, I've been helping some people who lost their whole homes from the flood two years ago. So we've done some work, and we've made some progress, but we could do more. So I just think that this is such a fantastic opportunity to address flooding and to address affordable housing.
Yeah, I think Paul hits on a great note there, because, and Mr. Sheehan also, because in the past, we've had some requests that we've made to the town to do some dredging or some tidiness along that property, because it's at the back of the property on Maple. And with the incentives that the state, especially the state, and there's some federal, that they want to remediate the flooding problems, this might be a great opportunity to start partnering with them and looking at what can happen with that stream going forward. It might be that we may have to look at what we did at Manhattan Avenue. We don't know. We're just looking at the layout of it today. Might be that we have to look at raising the property in some form to remediate the flooding problem that's
Maybe
there.
what you could do is, when you have the ribbon cutting for the, opening, if we have a lot, our state senators, assembly people, maybe the governor or senators, congressmen, maybe we could invite them to, right after the ribbon cutting, maybe we could take them on a tour of the Warren Avenue apartments, and you could show them. So we're talking about, this is step one in terms of affordable housing, but, we're just beginning, because we want to continue the effort, and that might be an opportunity to put this on their radar and get a commitment from them to actually help us get the funds we need.
Terrence, would you mind turning the lights back on again? I see we're sitting in
Oh,
the
no,
dark.
I turned them off.
And we know going forward that this is going to take a lot of partnering. We can't do this by ourselves. We're going to need every hand on deck, actively
We're all
involved.
committed to affordable housing
Yes.
and making
We
sure
know-
that
we know
do
that.
so I
We
don't
know
think-
that.
I just think it's important that we clarify that this is low-income housing we're talking
Right,
about.
yes,
So
well,
we keep saying affordable housing and interspersing it with low-income housing. This is not affordable housing. This is low-income housing that we're talking about at this moment.
At this moment, yeah.
Now, are you defining that as 80% of ANMI, up to 80%, or up to 60%?
We would like to go up to 80%.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Definitely, we are looking into it.
Yeah, we're looking at 80%.
we need to have that definition.
Right, because Mark Soja's properties, 90 and 100 and 33 Oak, those are up to 60% of AMI. So when somebody says no one else is stepping up, he is, and he's continuing to do so at the former West Help site. So together, you're working on and dealing with low income. but I think we need to get the definition down so that there's no misunderstanding.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And-
And
and-
we want to be cognizant of that going forward at every step of the way, because we look at numbers all the time of what the greater needs are, and we want to make sure that we, as much as possible, pinpoint those needs and
Right.
minister to those.
And then-
I say minister because I'm a preacher.
You don't have to tell us.
We would need you to come up. I'm sorry, if you could just sit right here. Thank you. Well, no,
I just wanted
please
to
state
add,
your name.
Can you introduce
James
yourself?
Basin,
You're a commissioner?
I am a
Please,
commissioner,
yes.
thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here,
Housing Authority?
the Housing Authority. I just had one note I just wanted to add.
Sure.
The source of capital will certainly drive the income levels of the building. And so if you're using low-income housing tax credits, there will be certainly a portion of that will have to be certainly designated for very low and moderate income.
Right.
Then
And,
you basically average them, don't you, to stay under a certain number?
You have to make sure that within the tax credit structure that you are meeting occupancy levels at those particular guidelines.
right. And also, this advocates for something we talked about several weeks ago, which is having a technical grant writer, or either a consultant, or this is something that we should discuss further.
That's good, good idea.
The other thing I will add too is that there's going to be significant capital coming for decarbonization, clean energy, through New York State Green Bank and the federal government. The IRA passed a $27 billion award. $8 billion of that will be for low-income communities, and so I think the time for this project is absolutely now.
Absolutely.
So we'll be lining up with
Yeah.
those requests to hope that we'll get some capital to support the green decarbonization of these buildings.
Excellent, right.
Good to see.
Thanks for that.
Have you reached out to the current occupants to give them an update as to what may be coming down the pike and how they will be treated?
Not formally. We will use the same process that we did use for Manhattan Avenue and the scattered sites. We'll have a series of meetings to let them know what our vision is, and make sure that they understand the feasibility of how that's going to work. That's why we're asking for that 4-story, looking at 4 stories right by this sound barrier wall, because it's kind of like at the back of the property when you're looking at it from Old Tarrytown Road. And when you look at it, we're envisioning looking at a kind of a step-up look from a 2-building to a 4-building, 2-story building on the street, 3-story and 4-story on that 1 building at the back. We need to meet with them and let them know how they will be impacted as far as changing their residence. Some people will have to move twice, minimum.
Why
What's
twice?
it like 20?
Well,
why
Well,
twice?
with the first two buildings on that end.
Oh, that's twice.
Will have
I
to
thought-
be
oh,
torn
okay, I
down
thought you
and
meant
do the
moved
first
together. Okay,
stage.
right, that makes
And
sense.
then once we get that building up, it will house all the people in those 2 buildings, plus a few more.
Right.
And then once we build the next stage, they just the people be moving one time. Those first people have moved twice, but then the rest of the property be moving one
Yeah.
time.
I've heard you-
About 30 people,
24.
24 people move twice, and the rest will move one time.
Yeah, I've heard you say 2 or 3 times now, the 4-story is needed so that when you do the construction, you can move the other people in. But that's a few months of a lifetime issue. Do you really need 4 stories? Other than you'd like not to move people, and you'd like to get them all in that one building? Is that what's driving the 4 stories?
4 stories because we have run into, you would be surprised, I put it that way, of the problem we've had trying to find places for people to move out while we renovated the scattered site. It's been a tremendous problem. I mean,
Costly process.
and costly. And if we can do it this way, we save money, plus we can minimize the time span. Because when you're renting or trying to rent from other properties, and they may have unit this month, next month they don't have a unit, we have pushbacks and sitbacks, and all those things are costly. So we're looking at doing it this way, that way we can minimize it much and be more in control of what we're doing as far as the moving.
Not to mention not having to move residents to those far-flung places.
Right.
Which was a source of consternation
Yeah.
among the
Especially
residents.
when
And-
they're
and
children.
moving them, we
Having
have,
extra room, having that extra space to
right.
have
And
more
then you gotta
availability.
move, you gotta move services, you gotta move your mailing address. I mean, it's stuff.
I do have another, just to back up a little, question. What size units are you talking about? 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 1-bedroom? What's
Oh,
a
yes.
mixture of?
We're looking at,
Sure, so there'll be 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms to complement what the current
Families.
housing stock is. So that's what we'll be looking, right? They're going to be then right-sized into the appropriate sized unit. And then from there, it'll be a mix. So the mix is going to be the same percentage as what they have now.
Okay.
The added 60 units, we can then see what the market is. There's a tendency to be more to 1s and 2s, but they'll probably know that
Right,
through the application process, and we can,
yeah.
that'll be folded in.
And another thing that occurs to me, and I'm not sure how this works, but if, to have accessible units, was that international design or?
We will have to
Yeah.
do, New York State has a mandate, and then through HUD or through the Fair Housing Act, we have other things to do. But yes, so there will be fully accessible potentially, but
Right.
certainly all of them will be visitable, and they'll all have, be adaptable is
Right.
the term that is,
Okay.
is where we are. I mean, to fully accessible, we still have to talk with the ownership.
Right,
about
that's just something to consider.
and also there are a few 5 bedrooms, we'll be eliminating all 5 bedrooms because it's difficult to really properly house 5 bedrooms at this time. Families are not as large as mine. It was 16 of us, brothers and sisters, but but we don't have don't have that problem anymore.
Then you need several
have 5 bedrooms?
units.
Well, my mom lives in a 5-bedroom house now, so.
I'm like, all right, see. I have a question, so I'm just thinking about this, this is way too early for this, but the current structure you have is the duplex up and down. So now when you go
It's
to
it's garden apartments.
garden apartment, no,
They're
we went.
duplex
Duplex.
garden
Yeah,
apartments,
that's-
so
Duplex garden, yeah.
Yes.
if you want to pardon my hands, but the buildings look like this. So you have one unit with 2 or 3 floors and the next one with 2 floors. And this is, and then the way the grade works from one to the other, one side looks as 2 stories and the other side is 3 stories. But they're actually all interlocked. So it's a garden apartment, but they're all duplexes.
So how is that how is that size-wise? Because now if I'm trying to visualize how that's gonna look. So if we're going like this now, and now we're gonna go straight to garden apartments?
No, there'll be
Okay, we're not
apartments.
going straight, okay, I think
Just
that's what.
No, now you're
just-
going to
now just-
apartments
but
regularly type.
but still, now the spacing, so how big are the apartments going to be now? Because remember, you have more space. as you're
Comparable
going
square
upstairs.
footage.
Comparable
Yeah,
square
okay.
footage. The whole idea is that we're moving the units toward the living styles of today,
Got you.
right?
Got you.
If everything would go great and there's a lot of enthusiasm, what's the estimated timetable? Like, what would be your dream, goals if everything falls in place?
I'm going to leave it to Ed to answer that question.
I'm not
I
putting
don't-
myself there.
yeah,
I-
I don't have, I mean, if you ask me, the
Right.
shovel's going in 6 months, but
Right.
there is still a process. So we still have to pursue a zoning change. And from there, we have to pursue a site plan approval. And then through the phasing process, right, permitting, phasing, funding, all that needs to
Funding.
come together. Then we're moving into construction.
Yeah.
So it could be, a few years.
Yeah.
for all
Would
that
it make
to come into
sense
place.
to, I'm not sure, how the zoning process work, but would they be able to apply for the zoning changes now? And this way, we could save some
Based on-
time.
Just gotta make sure, we just gotta follow the town's process.
They need plans.
Right.
You need
there's a lot
plans.
of-
To
To get the
Right.
zoning change, we have to have
Right.
plans.
No, but can't you
The
say?
questions we're asking now are
No, but
insignificant
if
compared
you
to
come
ones
up,
if you don't
if you
have
come up
something
with
for
a
them to look
3
at.
and 4, if you come, you already have the concept. So if you, could you come and say, you know, we have the concept, this is basically what we want, and we're gonna stay within, you know, within this concept, and we're asking for a zoning change that would let us, if we comply with this vision, to move ahead rather than have the exact, because my feeling is that if we know it's gonna take time, the zoning board always takes time. So is there a way of expediting the zoning reviews, so this way we're not waiting another, you know, long period of time?
I don't,
They can't answer that question.
I don't
That's
see
a
how we
town-
can answer that question, Mr. Finer, because I haven't seen the zoning change without plans yet.
We're trying, we understand, yes.
And we don't control the zoning board. That's something that the town board has to work with the zoning board to make sure that.
We don't work with the zoning.
No, everyone's separate, it is separate.
There's something called
I know they're all separate. I know they're all separate.
There's something called the ethics code. We can't influence the zoning.
But
board.
our reasoning for coming to you today is so we can get things started early, so that when we get to those things, that we don't have to put up a stop sign and say, wait, I didn't hear this and I didn't hear that. We want to be as open in the process, so that you're already looking for the green light down the street as we drive this vehicle down the road. We want to say, well, are you still interested? We'd rather have the zoning board say, wait, we're waiting for you to get some planning, rather than to go to the zoning board and say, wait a minute, we never heard of this. So that's why we're trying to get this started. This is the logic of coming to you.
So there is process,
Right.
right? And we can work with town staff to figure out the best route to take, both with the zoning change and then going through a site plan approval. Site plan approval, as we're talking about, might trigger some zoning
But you're also talking about a code change.
variance. Right, well, the first thing is the zone change, which is.
Sorry, yes, if I
Go
could
ahead,
on
yes.
process, what I would recommend is don't use the
comes
word
in
code
from above.
change. What I would recommend is not using the word code change. What you will be petitioning is the town board for a zoning map amendment to the M22. So the zoning code will stay the same, zoning ordinance will not change. You will request that zoning map change to the M22. Within that, you would absolutely prepare a site plan application as well as the environmental work. So when board members identify that, you know, there's concern about stormwater, you would prepare that in connection with the zoning map amendment. You would also, when board members identify that they would like to see cross sections so that they can get a good understanding for what the building would look like at 2, 3, and 4 stories, juxtaposed alongside the adjoining neighborhood, you know, that's something that you would do. And then that would, you know, help you identify the extent to, you know, landscaping that, you know, could buffer this type of development. So we will absolutely work with you on all these inputs that are secret-based. I would anticipate the town board would be lead agency. But that would be the flow of operations. And then absolutely, we would be thinking about concurrent reviews with both the planning board and the zoning board. They would all be involved agencies in the seeker process. So that's how you do get some concurrency there. But we can absolutely work with you offline and identify relevant seeker areas that, you know, we just know need to be really focused in on. And as staff, I, you know, certainly look forward to continuing the relationship that we've built and assisting you in any way we can.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. But thank you. This is, it's exciting, and I look forward to seeing this progress at a rapid pace as much as
would
possible
also-
within the constraints of what we're doing.
I would also like to hear, though, from the residents, because they're going from these duplex garden apartments to particularly to the 4-story, because there's a different culture in a 4-story building than a 3 or garden apartments or duplex garden apartments. They might not know each other as well in a 4-story building as they would and I just would like to get their view as to what would they enjoy and work with that.
Absolutely. That's why we have the meetings, and like we had about eight meetings with Manhattan Avenue. We'll have probably somewhere along that line with these to get their feedback and get their input.
I also think it would be very helpful to have more of these types of information meetings. This is really what this is an information meeting. So we get to hear what your proposal is, even though some of us have seen the plans in advance. You put context to it, which was very helpful. And if we could, basically early on, so there's no miscommunication, come up with whatever your definitions are so that we could work with that, what your needs are. The elevation drawings would be great, so that when you do move down along the process and do come for a hearing, most of the questions will have been asked.
Right. And further to what Councilman Sheehan said, just knowing the feedback you've gotten from the residents would be helpful because, as you know, we will hear about it even though it's the purview of the Housing Authority. So it would be great to know what to expect. Thank you.
No, that's our intent, and that's why we wanted to meet early. We may have to meet with the preliminarily with the zoning board and the planning board. We don't know, but we're trying to get the process started.
The zoning board doesn't do that kind of thing, but the planning board does.
I know, but we want to get as much information out
Get your
that
checklist.
this is what we want to do for the town and for the people of the town.
Awesome.
And let's make Greenberg number one.
All right, sounds like a plan.
Sounds
This
good.
is exciting. This is
Thank you
really
very much.
good.
Thank you very
so
much.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you very much.
And I'm excited about you all being excited about this.